Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Turner panel series on the state of the industry for Q3 2022. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that song, get you in the nice, scary, spooky Halloween mood. So speaking of scary situations, we're going to talk about the state of the industry. I'm just kidding. It's not all bad. We have a great group of panelists today from our Turner leadership, from a national and a regional perspective. At this point, 3 years into COVID, hopefully everybody understands the inner workings of Zoom. There's a Q&A feature at the bottom. Please feel free to type in any questions. We'll field as many as possible at the end of the discussion. So we're going to have an open conversation. We're going to look at each of the outlooks for our regions, focused mostly on the Northeast this discussion. Talk about supply chain, sustainability, resiliency, Inflation Act, labor escalation, and anything else that pops into this discussion. And then we're going to have a focus a little bit on our state of national health care. So without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. From our national perspective, we have Monica Serrano, who's in charge of our sustainability and resiliency. She works alongside a great group within our national, focusing efforts completely on sustainability and resiliency. Frank Yazzo, who's our VP and GM of our Source Blue group, also solely focused on equipment, materials, supply chain. He helps all of our teams understand and know where everything is at any given moment in time. And then Randy Kaiser, our VP and Director of Healthcare. If it is healthcare, Randy knows about it. Randy has been with the company 40 plus years, Randy. You don't look a day over 21.
That's what I'm talking
Regional discussions today. We have Dana Worthing, who's our pre-con manager for our Philadelphia business unit. We have George Gaughan for our VP of development for our Boston BU, hot market. And our moderator today is our very own New York-based VP GM, who's going to be talking New York and having a great conversation with our panelists. So I will see you all in about 45 minutes. Have a great conversation.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. And just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending. And when we're thinking about the market outlook and just reflecting past on this year, one, I can't believe 2022 is almost over. And you think about the challenge that just supply chain gave to us. Frank, I know you get to live it every day, but, we never thought we would have to dig so deep into the supply chain. Also, looking back at the beginning of the year, post-COVID, where's the market going, the trends, hybrid, what does that mean? And now as things and it start to stabilize, what are we really, seeing in the market, and what can we be looking forward to in 2023? So I'll just kick us off real briefly about just overview of what we're seeing in the New York market. So for over the next year. So right now we're projecting escalation 4 to 5%. Our labor has always been very high. So that's, kept us, in that 4 to 5% range. But when you start looking at, what's happening, raw material pricing coming down, shipping costs are coming down, timing is starting to, stabilize, but we haven't seen that effect yet of manufactured products start to decrease in price. And I know, Frank, you're going to talk about that a little later. But it's also what's also interesting that we just started seeing over the summer is some shortages in actually labor, especially in the demolition trade, and also in some of the electrical mechanical. We're now also it's more of a challenge for us to get some of the trades to work overtime. So we're seeing some overstaffing, which is then causing a little less efficiency in the field, but also causing the prices to go up. We're also seeing hot markets, residential, and they're going to be, they just have some zoning issues here they're going through. Aviation's been hot. The amenities and new lobbies for buildings for owners wanting to get their tenants back. And also on the TI side, I'm going to say more of the comforts of home, the amenities, more collaboration space, because over the last 3 years, we work differently. And now we're seeing that more in the design. So I think, over the next, 2 quarters into next year, we're going to start seeing potentially, I'm hopeful, more repositionings because of being driven by local law 97. We're also going to see, I think you're going to see owners, landlords putting in more co-working spaces into their facilities. And along with, I think we have a strong pipeline of healthcare work coming out there in New York. So I'll turn it over to Dana. What are you seeing in Philly?
In Philadelphia, similarly, there are a lot of markets right now that have a lot of activity, right? Healthcare, life sciences have, especially, since the pandemic, there's been a tremendous growth in those markets. We've always have our steady eddies, right? The higher education, there's a lot of higher education clients in the Philadelphia market, and have a steady amount of work coming into the market and putting a draw on those forces, and also residential. People, there's been a lot of moving around of folks, and we're seeing some of the big developers coming down into the Philadelphia market and taking on some big residential projects in the area that are something that we maybe hadn't seen as much in the past. Commercial interiors, you said it, after a cooling off period, we're really seeing those markets warm up again, but in a different way, looking at those collaboration spaces and open spaces, not so much of clients looking to take new space, but it's more of restacking and renovations in existing areas. Some of the biggest thing we see is, with so much work out in the market, it really is allowing subcontractors to be more selective in what they're pursuing, and what that is driving in the market is cost, right? Is where we're seeing cost because of subcontractors and how we get them to bid on the jobs, and how we foster that competition is going to be helpful for the benefit of the project. In the near term, we don't see it changing much, don't see a cooling off period. We see clients, some of our newer clients, some of the new developers in the space, maybe being a little bit more cautious and studying some of the numbers and before taking that step. But the tried and true clients, the folks that have been down here and are continuing to get space built in the Philadelphia market.
That's great. And George, how's Boston?
Yeah, great. Our markets have some similarities, but there are a few distinct differences. So we are a very busy Boston right now. We're somewhere in between running as hard as we can to keep up and very nervous and uncertain about the future. It's that inflection point where we're waiting to see what will happen next. From not knowing back in 2020, end of 2020, from not knowing where our next job will come from, to an absolutely full set of backlog, subcontractors having more jobs on their whiteboard than they can estimate. And to Dana's comment, they're being selective. Sure. So this, along with the materials uncertainty that's still continuing, has created a abnormally high escalation profile. It's frankly hard for me to say it. And if you actually do the math on grossing it up over the course of the last 2 years, we have a 12% escalation in 2021, and we're experiencing 12 or slightly higher by the finish of end of 22.
Wow. It's amazing the different areas of the country and how escalation just changes so drastically.
It has been driven by this explosion in lab science work in our market, and the return, this amazing springback from the depths of the pandemic in higher education and healthcare. So eds and meds in Boston, along with this explosion of life science. So what's current? What's happening right now is some of these life science projects have paused. A couple of them have stopped. Now, you have to remember how big it went first. So, but having a couple come off is probably actually good for our market. It feels like the reverse propeller has been applied, but the traction hasn't come yet. So we would expect that this escalation profile wouldn't continue. We're trying to advise our clients to retract that to what would be like a busy Boston normal, 5 to 6%, busy Boston normal, a lot of life sciences, healthcare getting its restart, a whole bunch of healthcare projects I'll speak to in a minute. We're tied up in permitting, but we're hoping that the market cools off just a little bit and we can be predictable and return to a more normal escalation profile.
That's great. Now, Randy, you guys, from a national healthcare perspective, it's been quite a couple of years, a little bit of a roller coaster. What are you seeing with the pent up demand, post COVID, and then everything the healthcare systems have learned due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think I could describe healthcare as being steady, continuing work. And I think going forward, there'll be more work. During COVID, there was a pause on a lot of jobs, and as everybody just hunkered down and took care of their patients. And then they came out of COVID in general. Healthcare systems came out okay because the feds had been pumping so much money into them during COVID. Plus, they had a lot of patients. Although where they make their money is surgery, and there wasn't very much surgery going on. There was more just taking care of their patients. So coming out, if you take a look, the hospitals had a fair cash on hand. They had their balance sheet looked pretty decent. Since then, though, there's a lot of procedures that did not come back. The procedures are still down. The only procedure in the last 12 months that went up is cancer treatment, oncology. So the hospitals are suffering a little bit by not making as much money, higher expenses with the nurses. Average hospital in the United States, the cost for them to do services went up 12%. However, the reimbursements from the feds through CMS only went up 3.8%. So there's a squeeze, and which makes me a little uneasy about going forward. And lots of these hospitals, in particular non-for-profits, have a significant amount of money tied up in the stock market. So they make interest income that pays for some of these projects. So not to scare everybody to death, I do believe because the BH, there's so much need in behavioral health, there's so much outpatient work, and there's so much pent out demand that somehow the hospitals will work through and at least have a steady, if not a slight increase in projects coming up. Some of the things that we've seen this year has been phenomenal in size. I think I was looking at it last night. There's 11 projects that we competed for that were over $700 million this year. So the jobs are not only a lot of them, but they're big. They're big projects. So I hope that healthcare will continue to be as strong as it has been for quite some time.
Great, thanks. So Monica, what are you seeing just from a national outlook with sustainability? Because it is just seemed to get a lot more traction over the last couple of years with just people wanting a healthier environment to work in.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the momentum to decarbonize the built environment is continuing, and not just focusing on the operational carbon. So, the carbon that is emitted during the operation of a building, but also the embodied carbon. That continues to be a hot conversation, along with other things like energy efficiency and electrification of buildings and quantifying emissions, right? Defining scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and figuring out how to calculate them. I think a trend that is becoming hotter is climate justice. So, how are our sustainable and resilient spaces, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, just making sure that everybody has access to all of those sustainable and resilient features of the built environment. It's almost like we're going from a carbon transition to a just transition. Additionally, I would say the Inflation Reduction Act has served as a booster and will serve as a booster for more than a few years, and an accelerator for many of those efforts, both sustainability and resiliency and climate justice. So a lot to elaborate on later.
Yeah, and Frank, don't worry, we're going to get you shortly, but
I know.
I'm going to take it over to George. When you look back in the past 5 years, what our portfolio looked like back then, what it looks like today, there are differences. What are you seeing that are different?
Yeah. So the stable piece of it that took a break during COVID, Randy mentioned it, was Boston's normal eds and meds. So our higher education and our hospitals, some of them had the same pause that Randy mentioned with let's hunker down, or let's concentrate on our patients or concentrate on our students and getting them back to the campus. And then they've taken off now that moment is over, and those have returned. The real difference is this lab science market. So our commercial office market is virtually replaced and then expanded on by this increase in lab science. So the scientist that is a part of one of the universities, a part of one of the major hospitals, and then as part of a startup lab is really fueling Kendall Square, Cambridge, the city of Boston, and now expanding into surrounding communities like Somerville and other small communities around Boston. So this has been the biggest shift, away from some residential, away from some hotel that will return eventually. Commercial office is flat, to this lab science expanding like crazy.
That's great. Dana, what are you seeing in Philadelphia?
Yeah, continuing, very, very similar trend here in Philadelphia, where there's a higher demand for life sciences space than there's currently available. So we're working with, our existing clients and so many new developers coming down here and wanting to, jump in, not even get their feet wet, but jump full in on, that core shell life science building. With a lot of space available, we've done a tremendous amount of work on repurposing existing former office buildings, and how can we leverage that space, leverage those structures, and transform them into core and shell life science buildings, and available to the market right now, right? Current need more space. What can we do to quickly get more space? And that's one thing that we've been doing a tremendous amount of work on, and seeing clients taking those steps to repurpose those existing buildings. We are starting to see, some of that slow down a little bit with some of the upstarts, some of the, newer companies on the market who are starting to ask some questions maybe, and really looking at, what is the cost of doing work? What is escalation going to cost? What is the cost of me getting money and financing? And, is that something that we're really ready to jump in now? So some of those clients, we're seeing a little bit of a cooling off and maybe pushing pause on some things, or really going through that value management process. Specifically in Philadelphia, I know, we've talked a fair amount, George, just about, what is the Philly market demanding versus what is the Boston market demanding. And we see a lot of clients coming down here and saying, maybe someone that's done a ton of work up in Boston or a ton of work up in New York, and looking to come down to Philadelphia with a model that is different than what the Philadelphia core and shell land, developer model is facing. And how can we right size that project in this market? CFM for GSF, or tons of cooling, what are we offering in life sciences core and shell as base building, compared to deferring to the tenant for what the clients down here are looking for. So right sizing projects is, we're spending a tremendous amount of time just making, guiding clients on that, to make their buildings fit budget wise and be attractive in the market.
That's very interesting. Now, Randy, taking the national healthcare look, depending on where you are in the country, it drives escalation, with the hot market of, from Tennessee to Texas to New York. Are you seeing different trends on where where healthcare work now is going, different locations, or than we did 5 years ago?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different variables that change state by state. What is the amount of work that goes on, with the CON being taken away in Florida, and it's like the wild, wild west out there. Everybody's building in Florida. We just put a hospital out to bid and got 0 bids on the electrical in South Florida. So that's how busy a market that is. So what's interesting is you take a look at Means put out an article that talked about city to city hospital cost increases, and they were a wide range from city to city what things cost. But if you take ENR's BCI, the Building Cost Index, take a look at it from the start of COVID to today, as of Monday's ENR published reports, it shows an increase of 28% for construction on average throughout the United States. The problem with healthcare is that there's no way near that much more money being pumped into it from the feds. And in addition to that, we're not building hospitals anything like we did. Well, I say that's an exaggeration. We're building hospitals differently than what we did 5 years ago. The sustainability has been a big push. Health and Human Services, HHS, has through CMS has put the squeeze on hospitals to make hospitals sustainable. So that's a cost driver in the new designs that we're seeing post-COVID. Resiliency is a big push. The FGI guidelines 2018-22 and 2022 is increasing costs for hospitals. Building COVID resistant hospitals, negative air, more filtration, air sterilization, UV lights, those sort of things have added a significant amount of money to the HVAC system. And it's the ever-going technology changes. I was telling somebody in a presentation last week that the digital foot wall that is commonplace in hospitals now is about $20,000 per room. So we have seen, depending on where you're at, 25 or so percent increase in just escalation, but another 10% for all those things that I mentioned, which puts the squeeze on making projects go forward.
That's interesting. And I'm sure all, the cost, or even just this last year, what mechanical price has gone up to, through the roof, that Frank will talk about, is not helping those escalation costs. I'm going to take a little different spin on it. What we were seeing 5 years ago to what we're seeing today, and hopefully more in the future, is delivery methods. So just complete, more design build we're starting to see, and more design build, design assist. As you guys all know, we're moving at the end of this year to our new office space at 66 Hudson, and we did design build, but true design assist, which in the interior market in New York, there's not much of it. And when you look at all the challenges you have with supply chain, right? The easy thing, just, okay, buy things early and release, but you got to be coordinated in the interiors market to start releasing materials correctly. So we're able to start mid-April and have a TCO walkthrough by October. So just under 26 weeks for a 55,000 square foot fit out, where you would lose that in the traditional. And I'm hopeful that we're going to start seeing more of that, because it really helps. It's a great countermeasure to alleviate supply chain challenges. So with our escalation in mind, Dana, where do you think the market's going, escalation? And if you guess it right, we all should just, pack it on up and start new careers in guessing the market.
It's tricky, right? No one has that crystal ball, right? It is a busy market in Philadelphia. We're seeing escalation in the 8 to 10% this year, compared, and it's interesting to hear New York, you're projecting, in you think you said 4 to 6. Yeah. And, up in Boston, it was significantly higher. So it's interesting to see, even as close as we are, right? We can hop on a train, I can get up to Boston in an hour, but how different our markets really are. The key, though, is that, we're starting to see these numbers come down somewhat. They're coming down, right? We don't anticipate a negative, a go to zero, or a reverse cycle. So what that means is the best strategy is still going to be, getting out to the market and getting ahead of that escalation if you really want to mitigate those impacts. But with that, what's critically important is complete documents, right? Making sure that when we're getting out there on the market, that we have documents that subcontractors really feel that we are going to buy, and we're going to get that competition from them, right? We've heard it a few times on this call about how busy the submarket is, and one way that you're going to entice bidders to bid on that job is with good documents that they're they can put a price to, that they're feeling that they're not putting huge risk out there.
No, that's a great point. Just when we also talking with our trade partners, also due to COVID, they had a lot of their estimators retire, change careers. So that's also another strain. I don't know if you're seeing it in your market as well.
Definitely, definitely seeing workforce and just estimators or pre-con teams being spread thin. We see a lot of work out there, and we're pushing that work out just as much. So definitely seeing that as a strain. And, and something else that, when we're talking escalation, or something that we can manage when we're talking about pricing is, we talk about the market, we talk about escalation, we talk about, construction price index, we talk about, commodities, working with us on monitoring what those commodities are and what that means, right? We get prices in and we sit on them sometimes for 3 months, 30 days, 60 days before we go and buy those. But understanding what's happened in the commodities market in that, month or 2 months, and, can we leverage, what that drop or what that dip could be in the market before we go and buy that, rather than taking that quote and buying that as it is. So just, working and understanding what the commodities markets are and staying on top of that information is very important.
That's great. So Monica, so you had to debunk the sustainability myth of how much does sustainability add to the project, if any?
Yes, I'm glad you've ended with that, because sometimes it actually saves you money, right, in the long run. Exactly. But the truthful answer is it depends. It depends on the type of building. It depends on where the building is. Mm-hmm. And it also depends on when you think of sustainability. If you think of sustainability very early in the design, even before the design starts, it could not even have a premium. I mean, think LEED silver, LEED gold could potentially have no premium if you think of it early on. So it's essential to think of the sustainability and resilient goals that building will have early on, so everyone is on the same page. Whatever that may be, LEED, resilience goals, electrification. And it's also important to analyze past day one, right? Even if there is an investment on day one, many of the benefits show after the building is operating, after there is a disruption or a disaster, right? You can see those benefits on your electric utility bill. You can see the benefits from incorporating resilience in your building after a disruption, when you can get back in operation quickly enough, when you don't have to repair the building as much. So very important to do a life cycle analysis, to do a cost benefit analysis of different technologies or the building as a whole. On the resilience topic, and when I say that resilience may incorporate a premium on day one, but once that disruption happens, there's this very good comprehensive study called Mitigation Saves by NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences, that shows that there's an ROI of 4-to-1 to 12-to-1 from incorporating resilience, depending on what the hazard is and where the building is at.
That's great. So switching gears over to our skilled trade labor force, I was doing some research and reading it. Everyone knows our labor force is declining. And what's interesting to me, in 10 years, 40% of the current trade laborers are going to retire and not going to be there anymore. And we're hearing about how busy our markets are. So what are the countermeasures that we need to implement? We have started to implement. It could be from workforce development, getting people into the trades. Is it using our lean practices, more efficiently, prefabrication? So George, I'll hand it over to you, see what you guys are doing in Boston.
Sure. So we absolutely have a aging workforce in Boston. We've got a particular owner's rep that helps us with a study that we do jointly that is tracking the age of the workforce, and it is absolutely aging. We need to replace workforce in order to sustain our market. Our market has exploded and grown, and we're just running too hard. We don't have enough labor to service the market. Now, if the recession comes and there's some unemployment, well, maybe that levels for a little while, but long term, we have this need. So what are the countermeasures? We're trying to make lemons out of lemonade here and take an opportunity. So increase diversity, have workers coming from different places, younger workers in the workforce, getting training, coming from VOTEC schools, coming from neighborhoods that haven't normally supplied labor to the city of Boston's workforce, and creating a more diverse workforce. So how do we do that? And we can promote it a bit, but really the way to do that is make the job site an attractive place to come. It has no graffiti, like zero tolerance. It has warm water every day, right? To wash your hands, a good place to take a break, a good place to say, I'm proud of my career. I want to work on the job site. And it's not just a Turner Construction. This they're trying to bring industry-wide. so that workers want to come to the workforce to have a career in construction. It has a different image. We have an opportunity here with the aging workforce to replace with a new workforce and make the place to work a caring environment that takes care of the worker and appreciates them.
That's great. And Dana, what kind of measures are you taking a look at?
Building on Frank's messaging, right, is making your project the project that people want to work on, that subcontractors want to work on, and they're going to bid that work, right? So making jobs appealing, targeting outreach at the subcontractor level to make sure that folks are aware of, if there is a draw on that, on the limited number of resources and workers that are available, how do we help subcontractors maximize that workforce and be productive with it, right? So lean, clean job sites, safe job sites, jobs where subcontractors are going to get the maximum productivity out of their workers and be able to go on to the next job, and making making job sites advertised as that, making projects preferred to work on, working on payment terms, making sure working with clients who are paying, right, good payment terms and paying on time to keep subcontractors wanting to bid and work on those jobs. Great.
Now, Frank, what are you seeing now? The labor shortage, and it's just a systemic problem. What are you seeing from a prefab? How can that help us?
Yeah, Dan, it absolutely is going to help us. There are many areas in the country where the labor just isn't there and hasn't been. Forget about the retirees, COVID, things like that we're seeing in the big cities. There are just areas that we're working that the labor just has to get to that location to build the building. So prefab is the way to go. And there's so many reasons to go prefab. It's not just because of labor. It's quality of the work. You're building in a factory setting, so safety in the factory is better. Safety for the job site is better. There's less folks on the job that are needing to be there to do the install conventionally. The quality, like I said, sustainability. Think about sustainability for a second. All the debris that is not going to be on the job because you're building that, whatever it is, bathroom, penthouse floor, you're building all those things offsite. Just think about insulation, right? That goes in a penthouse. How many boxes and boxes and boxes of insulation that are on a job site and then the debris has to be removed. That's all happening in a factory setting, in a prefab situation. So all those reasons are great reasons to go prefab. And schedule, right? You're building a part of your building in another place, and you're taking areas off the critical path. We're doing a lot of prefab penthouses, and we know most jobs, penthouse, got to get that penthouse operational to get climate control going. And if you could build your penthouse while the rest of the building is being built, and then bring it to a job and crane the sections up, how much faster you're going to get your climate control going in a building.
Do you have challenges right now with prefab?
Sure, there are definitely challenges with prefab. First challenge that I've seen is the prefab manufacturers don't have that construction background. They think in a factory setting, they think in a manufacturer's mentality. So we're working with them to get them more like contractors, thinking like contractors, and making sure that they're following schedules. It's like they're building a piece of equipment, but they're really building a floor of our building. So we've got to get them up to speed with things like that.
Now, Randy, we have the mega projects coming up you're seeing around the country with data centers, chip plants, EVs. And as Frank, you mentioned, they could be in parts of the country where the labor is not there and they're drawing that local labor away. Randy, are you seeing challenges on the healthcare side in certain areas of the country with that?
Absolutely. The thing about healthcare, though, usually those big projects are in the cities where you have more access to workers. But I just recently read an article that said the amount of construction workers in the United States is down to 7.2 million. That was a peak at 7.7 million in 2007. And now we're doing dollar value wise almost twice as much work with about 5% less people. So it is a problem throughout. You know, what I find interesting is I think healthcare, I would say between healthcare and data centers, have been pushing the limit in the envelope for prefabrication. And I did see some videos of a factory, North Carolina, I think, that was making those penthouses and prefab central energy plants, and they were using a lot of robotics in it. So some people say, well, it doesn't help you a whole lot if you're going to prefab. You're still using the workers. They're just inside of a building instead of being out on the job. Well, first of all, it makes it a little bit more inviting to work in a building, and you're not going to get rained out and, you know, cold as heck. And the other thing is, if you can figure out in these manufacturing plants how to do more robotics, I think you're going to really help the situation with the shortages of labor.
That's great. Now, Frank, so how is the prefab going to be impacting, you know, the starts of construction and developer planning? What do we have to do?
Well, I think we got to think early. We got to buy early. A lot of the data center clients around the country, they are coming to us particularly to buy equipment, and not just equipment, systems that can be built prior to even jobs being put in the ground. We're working with a particular data center client, I can't say who it is, that has hired us to work on 10 of their projects, at least in the year 2023, to get racking systems ready so that when the projects go to market, they're ready, and they're taking 5 to 6 months off of their schedules by doing this, and it gets them to market faster.
Wow. So Monica, and jump to you. You had the fun task of reading up and studying on the Inflation Reduction Act. So can you just give us a high-level overview of how this is going to impact, or what does this mean for our industry?
Yeah, for sure. I would be glad to. So big picture, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's studies out there already that show that carbon reduction as a whole will get to 40% or so by 2030. This is compared to a 2005 baseline. But, most of the inclusions as they relate to our industry are around energy efficiency, resilience, and climate justice. I would probably put them in those buckets. There are funds for development in coastal communities and climate resilience, tribal climate resilience, mitigation of different hazards like droughts and floods. There's a big focus on low carbon materials, developing, like there are $250 million to the EPA, so the EPA can develop better, more transparent and standardized EPDs. So EPDs are those environmental product declarations that tell us the embodied carbon of different materials. And so, there needs to be more work on developing more EPDs so we can calculate that carbon embodied in materials, which as buildings become more and more efficient, that piece of the pie of the embodied carbon in materials is bigger and bigger. So funds for better EPDs, focus on low carbon materials, even as FEMA gets funds to build better after a disaster, there are funds to build better with low carbon materials. There are some grants and incentives for residential energy efficiency. So think solar, batteries, heat pumps, electric HVAC equipment. As we were talking about the workforce, there are funds for training contractors on energy efficiency upgrades. There used to be an energy efficient commercial building deduction. It's basically, it promotes making buildings more efficient per square footage and the building owner would get a certain amount of, cents on the square footage that used to be only limited to public agencies. Now the Inflation Reduction Act extends it to private entities. And when it comes to climate justice, just a couple of examples are, grants for neighborhood access and equity. So making neighborhoods walkable, safer, and providing affordable transportation. So I think those are probably the highlights. There is, it's still early on. We're still trying to figure out how those funds are going to get to the actual building construction, but we will get there. It's trickling down to agencies, but there's a lot to unpack in the Inflation Reduction Act.
That's great. So thank you for that. And with the big focus on sustainability and resiliency, emissions accounting, what is that? Just explain it. And because, we have operational carbon, embodied carbon. So what are we doing with that?
Yeah, that is a big topic. So when it comes to the building, and then I'll get to the bigger picture, I'll start granular. So there's basically carbon emitted all the way from the beginning when you extract materials from nature, or where you recycle materials, making materials for our building, getting them to the construction site and installing them. All of that carbon is embodied carbon. And then when the building opens its doors and starts, operating as a building, that's the operational carbon, right? So it's that electricity and all those utilities that are used to operate the building. And then when the building gets to, the end of its life cycle, then you deconstruct that building, right? So there's a carbon associated with deconstructing that building. So it is about accounting for all of that carbon. It's the carbon of the life cycle of the building. And so as an industry, we're figuring out how to do it. There's EPDs. EPDs is one example. That is how what the embodied carbon of the materials is. But it's definitely little pieces of the life cycle of the building that we're trying to figure out how to calculate. But there's many tools out there. As an example, the EPA has a tool called WARM that has conversion factors for materials if they're recycled, if they're landfilled, if they're reused. And so, in a couple of our projects, we're figuring out the carbon from deconstructing and demolishing buildings. So we are at a point in history where calculating all of these emissions is possible. And we'll get, more efficient and better at doing it, but the tools are out there. And then the big picture of emissions are scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, right? So scope 1, and everyone can define them slightly different, but big picture scope 1 are those emissions that you're responsible for, that you own. Scope 2 are, you don't own them, but think of your electric bill, right? You don't own the power plant, but you use the electricity. And then scope 3 is the supply chain. And there is a big focus on all of them. I think scope 3 is probably the hardest to get there, but there's interest, but there's also some initiatives, right? And some, as companies focus more on ESG, environmental, social, and governance, the quantification of those emissions will become more and more relevant.
Gotcha. Thank you. So jumping into, the buzzword of 2022, supply chain. So, which isn't fake news. And so Frank, just, we've heard and we've all felt all the hardships of supply chain throughout the year. Do we have good news on the horizon?
I wish I could tell you that, Dan. When I tell people what I do for the company, every time people look at me and say, "Oof, you don't have a great job." Yeah, I guess I'm crazy because I do love it, and I love the challenge of trying to figure this stuff out. So that's a good thing, I guess. We've seen incredible escalation this year in the equipment arena. Obviously, we've seen longer lead times. Switchgear has gone to 70 plus weeks in lead time. That's just unheard of, right? When the first time I heard it, I said, "We don't need you. I'll go somewhere else." And then I went somewhere else, and it was the same thing. So it is real. It is real. There are constraints from labor in the factories. There's still constraints with overseas buying. Even though products are being built in the United States, there are several things that are still coming out of China, like breakers, that have caused real delay in switchgear, especially. And that is probably the hardest hit of equipment that I've seen so far in the last year.
Yeah, because I mean, we've been tracking supply chain month by month, and we see a lot of the trade stabilizing from architectural finishes, not getting back to where it was, but electrical, lighting, anything electrical is not stable.
Yeah, and you're not really getting, look, I got 160 people in my group around the country, and they're solely focused on supply chain, talking to manufacturers, along with the procurement folks around the country. We're talking to 350 to 400 manufacturers and vendors on a monthly basis to really understand what the supply chain is, digging deep, going into their supply chains, trying to understand that, because that's incredibly important, right? Because when we first started talking to these vendors, they didn't have an idea of their supply chain. We had to help them dive deep to really get to that root cause of the problem on their end, because their sales folks, they just didn't know. They just didn't know what was going on. So you got to dig deep into that supply chain to understand and have good effect on your projects.
And Dana, you're seeing similar?
Yeah, I mean, with supply chain, one of the best strategies that we can offer to help mitigate it is getting a CM partner on board early, right? Early, you think of a project, right? The owner, the designer, and the GC being the third leg of that stool that can provide the information that's necessary to inform budget and schedule. You think about the cost of a project, the overall cost of a project, and the cost of early engagement of a CM is minimal in that grand scheme of things. But the information expertise that we provide is, unquantifiable. Coordinated schedules and site logistics information from the earliest stages of design that then go into feeding a procurement plan that's going to tell us that, that switchgear is 70 weeks out. So when do we need to buy it? So we have a tower crane that's on site to be able to get that gear into place. And that early coordination that, when you're, if you don't do it early, you miss the boat. And another item you kind of mentioned on it is, so great, electrical gear, 70 weeks, everyone knows that. But, even beyond that, architectural finishes, if we want to make sure that we're not only planning, the big pieces of equipment, but down to, working with architects to specify materials that are available, that have good lead times and at less of a cost, and make sure we're doing that early in advance with the architects rather than, going into a value engineering or going into a cycle of non-productive work further down the line, and getting that all designed into a job early and bringing our expertise into the process.
Thanks. So Frank, I know we're getting short on time, but just real quick, materials, equipment that you're seeing having the biggest impact on our project with lead times and constraints. Yeah,
so I've already mentioned gear. The other one I'll mention is generators as well. Their lead times have gone up, and the problem that we have is you have one manufacturer that we all know that there's the big four in gear, right? Eaton, ABB, Schneider, Siemens. So 9 months ago, Eaton had great lead times. So what did everybody do? They rode that horse. All the clients wanted to go, all the designers wanted to go to Eaton. Us too, right? Because they gave us the best lead times to get our projects done. Now Eaton, they're struggling to get material out because they've gotten so many orders. And ABB has come back with some better lead times now because 9 months ago, they were impacted by the over ordering from them. So it's going to keep going back and forth. There's going to be new challenges. Today it's breakers. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. So we just got to be ready, and we got to, I said it earlier, we got to understand the deepness into their supply chains so that we could help mitigate those things.
Great. So George, you did mention the word recession, right? So we're talking about recession, escalation. So when you think about when a client comes to you wanting to ask you to start a project right now, or do you push it? What do you do in Boston?
Yeah. So I'll echo a couple of things that other folks said. So even if this recession comes, we don't see, especially in a busy Boston, this going to a negative escalation. So 0 or negative, it's not going to go there is our best guess. So you're still paying more every day. It will hopefully be a much less steep curve, but there's still escalation. So there's no reason to sort of wait such that the project will cost less in the future. So the idea that I would offer in such a tough market is start early, like we've said. Center, I'll put a plug in for our architect friends that may be listening, center around a good set of documents and get the team energized early to go buy things that need to be bought, strategize on things that need to be strategized, and make smart decisions. I'll offer one thought that it won't fit for everyone, but on a very big curtain wall, one of our clients has put an allowance mark in for aluminum. And the contract with the aluminum curtain wall supplier actually follows an index. And they will reap the benefits if the price of aluminum goes down, and they will pay the extra if the price of aluminum goes up. It's a very sophisticated client. It's a sophisticated contract, but things like that happen and benefit the client when they happen early, centered around a good team. And I think that's a prescription for right now. It's not a market where you just decide late and hammer it through. Nobody's going to show up.
Yeah.
Get a plan, work the plan, have it done early, and you can have a successful project.
Great. So as we're coming to the end of our discussion, just Randy, some final thoughts.
Real quick, I think I've been telling our clients we need to have contingency plans. There's so much variables that are out there that are changing things so rapidly. We have to think what type of circuit breakers we could use if we got surprised by a delivery, if we got surprised by escalation, and let's have a contingency plan so it doesn't totally derail the job.
Great, thanks. And Monica, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I had a thought earlier on when we talk about prefab. I didn't get the chance to say anything. It is, I fully agree with Frank. Prefab, there's a sustainability aspect to it. There's less waste produced from prefab. And as threats like extreme heat will continue to be part of our day-to-day to our construction force, a controlled environment like that for building would be beneficial. Last minute thoughts, I'll also second what you guys have said. A shout out to designers and architects. Have that early conversation with the client on what are the sustainability and resilient goals. You will save that way. Don't incorporate them later on. It will be more expensive. And plan for future climate. I think we're realizing that all these disasters are happening simultaneously, right? There's flood somewhere and there's a drought somewhere else. And so planning for historical climate is no longer valid. It's about deciding how long you want your building to exist for and incorporating resiliency and sustainability. Both mitigation and adaptation to climate change are essential.
Great. And Frank.
Yeah, Dad. So final thoughts, buy early. The data center market continues to rise. The battery plants are coming and they're going to continue to be built over the next 10 years. And that's going to affect major equipment on all of our projects. So developers need to be on the lookout for that. They need to buy early and they really need to understand where the best focus should be in the design with the equipment so that they're not getting delays in their projects.
And Dina, thoughts?
Final thoughts. I know it sounds self-serving, right? But getting that CM partnership, getting that person on board early when you can influence the design, influence the release of material, someone that knows the pulse of the current construction market and can make sure we're informing our clients on when's the right time to go out, what jobs are coming up and how do we fit into that right sweet spot in the market, and just, getting that partnership established.
Great. And George, your final thought?
Just a quick one. I think as the market shifts here, I think a shift is inevitable. As the market shifts here, projects that are particularly predictable will get attention. Make your project predictable, have it have green lights to go, and it'll attract attention and get the best value.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Great discussion. Hey, Lisa.
Hey there. No time for questions, but it was a great conversation. I took copious notes. So thank you all again for your time and your insight. Hopefully this was valuable to everyone. We should be publishing our national and regional market reports, so be on the lookout. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Reach out if you have any questions. We'll have our next panel probably the beginning of 23. I can't believe it is almost over. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one. Stay safe. Happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanks,
Halloween.
everybody.
Bye.